Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the Homeowners Association, which does not understand that I have already bought the house. Picture this. I had the keys to my brand new home jangling in my pocket, a U-Haul groaning in the driveway, and a fat stack of signed closing documents tucked safely in the glove box. Yet a tiny committee of badge-wearing busybodies stood between me and my front door. They called themselves our Neighborhood Beautification Council, but everyone in town knew them as the HOA. They wore matching pine green windbreakers, carried binders thicker than phone books, and, astonishingly, claimed that I, the legal owner on every recorded deed, was trespassing on their property. The spokesperson, a silver-haired woman named Doreen, wagged a manicured finger at my welcome mat. "You can't unload another box," she announced, "because we allocated this address to Mr. Landon's cousin last week. Paperwork mix-up. Sorry for the inconvenience." Behind her, a guy I'd later learn was the HOA president's golfing buddy pretended to measure my mailbox height with a novelty ruler. He nodded gravely, as if the fate of the free world hinged on the verdict. I blinked. Then I laughed. Hard. I'd spent the past 6 months navigating home inspections, escrow nightmares, and a marathon closing session while chewing stale complimentary donuts. "Nice joke," I told Doreen. "Now please move, you're in the path of my fridge dolly." Her smile flattened. She whipped out a laminated citation threatening daily fines for unauthorized occupancy. When I took a slow step forward, she dialed 911 with theatrical flourish and shouted that an armed squatter was invading a private residence. My heart somersaulted. I hate confrontation, but I hate liars more. And calling in a bogus emergency? That was next-level reckless. 2 squad cars rolled up in under 4 minutes, sirens, lights, the whole parade. I greeted the officers with a handshake, offered every scrap of proof I had, settlement statement, title insurance, even the thank you card my realtor had mailed me. Meanwhile, Doreen performed Shakespeare in the background, clasping her pearls and insisting I'd forged everything. The cops eyed her windbreaker-clad entourage, then my U-Haul full of neatly labeled kitchenware, and decided a courthouse would sort it out. They asked both parties to remain civil until county records could be double-checked Monday morning. Remain civil? I nearly swallowed my molars. That weekend was supposed to be my first in my own house, grilling burgers on the back patio. Instead, I spent 2 nights at a motel overlooking the freeway, replaying the dumb scene on loop and wondering how a self-important club could override binding contracts. Turns out the HOA president, Randall Landon, fancied himself untouchable. He'd promised his 20-something cousin, Bryce, a sweet starter home inside our quiet cul-de-sac. Bryce's mortgage application had tanked due to credit card chaos, but Randall refused to accept defeat. So while my purchase crawled through escrow, Randall quietly told Bryce, "Don't sweat it. I'll find you something." And when my deal finally recorded, Randall panicked. Instead of admitting Bryce had no claim, he decided to muscle me out using HOA scare tactics, hoping I'd cut my losses and vanish. He miscalculated badly. Monday morning, I marched into the county recorder's office the second the doors unlocked. The clerk printed my warranty deed with a raised seal, proving ownership as of 9:04 a.m. on May 3rd, the same timestamp stamped on every title search in the system. I then drove straight to a friend's law firm downtown. Mal was a soft-spoken contract attorney who'd tutored me in property law back when I was cramming for my license. She skimmed the HOA bylaws, shook her head, and muttered, "They're leaning on intimidation, nothing more. Want me to send a cease and desist?" "Actually," I said, "I want to move in today. Can you make that happen without someone hauling me off in cuffs?" Mal grinned. "Let me make a phone call." Within hours, we had a notarized letter addressed to any law enforcement officer responding to my address. It outlined my ownership, cited state statutes protecting peaceful entry, and mentioned that false police reports constitute a felony. I printed a dozen copies, then, accompanied by 2 off-duty sheriff's deputy friends of Mal's, there as private citizens, I pulled the U-Haul back to my driveway. Doreen's green windbreaker flapped into view so fast I wondered if she had a motion sensor. "Oh, no you don't," she barked, brandishing another HOA citation for non-compliance. I handed her Mal's letter. She read 2 lines, paled, and stomped away. The neighbors watched from behind curtains as the deputies helped carry my couch inside. No sirens, no drama, just the satisfying thunk of my door closing behind me. For 48 blissful hours, I arranged furniture, painted accent walls, and explored the attic like a kid poking around a pirate ship. I thought I'd won. Then Thursday morning, Bryce, Randall's cousin, appeared on my porch with a duffel bag and a skateboard under his arm. He announced that his room was upstairs and demanded the garage code. I laughed again, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He waved a flimsy occupancy letter signed by Randall, executed on HOA letterhead. The stamp looked official, but the date was handwritten in glitter pen. I told him to leave. He refused. I called the non-emergency police line. Officers arrived, glanced at my deed on the fridge, and escorted Bryce off the property. Before they put him in the cruiser, I saw him text furiously. 15 minutes later, Randall himself called my phone. "Listen, pal," Randall said, using the tone of a man who'd never heard the word no. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble. I've got big plans for this community, and they don't involve you." I stayed quiet. Let bullies ramble, they dig their own holes faster that way. "I'm willing to compensate you for your expenses," he continued. "If you walk away, we'll cut you a check. Cashier's check. 6 figures. My jaw unhinged. "You want me to abandon a house I legally own and love because your cousin likes the floor plan? Consider it an investment, neighborhood harmony. You'll even turn a profit." I thanked him for the offer, declined, and added, "If Bryce sets foot on my property again, I'll pursue a restraining order." Then I hung up. That afternoon, the HOA issued emergency bylaw amendments allegedly banning all vehicles taller than 5 feet from parking overnight. A clear swipe at my beloved 1998 Cherokee, which sat proudly at 6 feet 2 inches, followed by a new voluntary landscaping fee to finance, get this, an arbor revitalization project, targeting precisely the pair of mature oaks shading my living room. They also slapped neon pink violation stickers on my fence for incorrect stain color, although I'd never stained a thing. Mal responded with a 24-page injunction request. She filed it Friday morning. The court date landed 2 weeks out, enough time for Randall's crew to escalate. They hired a towing company to drag my SUV at 2 a.m., claiming emergency sidewalk access. I woke to an empty driveway and a $700 impound bill. The tow yard manager, after seeing my ownership documents, admitted the HOA rep insisted the vehicle was abandoned. Luckily, dash cam footage from a neighbor showed the truck hooking up my Jeep without notice. That video became Exhibit A. Exhibit B was a chain-link fence someone erected across my driveway while I was at work, padlocked at both ends. When the locksmith cut it, we discovered the padlock still had its tag, purchased with Randall's corporate card at a home improvement store 5 blocks away. Exhibit C was Bryce's skateboard, hurled through my front window one late night, captured on my doorbell cam. He'd skateboarded off before I could confront him, but the high-def footage showed his varsity leather jacket complete with the name Bryce embroidered in bold. By the time our hearing rolled around, the judge looked equal parts amused and furious. Mal presented the timeline like she was pitching a true crime docuseries. Randall's attorney, some poor soul who probably thought he'd be handling routine covenant disputes, tried framing everything as misunderstanding. The judge ordered Randall to the stand. Under oath, he admitted he'd reallocated several homes in the subdivision over the past decade, mostly to relatives or friends who'd missed out in bidding wars. He framed it as conflict resolution. The courtroom gasped. The judge granted my injunction, fined Randall personally for contempt, and referred his testimony to the district attorney for potential fraud charges. She also lectured Doreen, who sat trembling in the gallery, about the criminal penalties for filing false police reports. I drove home feeling vindicated but exhausted. I wanted closure, not a legal saga. Then my phone buzzed. Mal had new intel. A paralegal digging through HOA financials uncovered a shell account labeled Community Improvement Fund. The ledger showed large withdrawals the same days rival homebuyers mysteriously withdrew their offers over the past 3 years. Cash payoffs, extortion. Bryce's skateboard stunt was child's play compared to what they'd done to other families. Mal asked if I'd considered joining a class action. "Absolutely," I said. Over the next month, our quiet neighborhood metamorphosed into a circus of subpoenas, depositions, and investigative reporters perched on curbs. One elderly couple, the Lyles, confided that Randall had forced them to sell low after threatening daily fines for the color of their mailbox. A single mom described how her real estate lockbox vanished hours before closing, only for Bryce to show up at her open house acting like an approved buyer. Families who'd caved and moved away realized they'd been swindled. The district attorney convened a grand jury. Randall, Doreen, Bryce, and 3 other board members were indicted on counts ranging from wire fraud to racketeering. Bryce was additionally charged with vandalism and criminal mischief. His skateboard cameo again. Even the tow company manager got slapped with aiding and abetting. Meanwhile, the county placed our HOA under emergency receivership. A court-appointed trustee audited every penny, reversed illegitimate fees, and suspended all covenant enforcement until new elections could be held, assuming the HOA survived it all. Neighbors hosted potluck dinners on the cul-de-sac, swapping stories of petty tyranny. We tore down the ridiculous approved color palette billboard and repainted our front doors however we pleased. Kids drew chalk murals on the sidewalks that the old regime would have power-washed within minutes. The vibe was part Liberation Day, part block party. During one gathering, Mr. Lyle raised a glass of sweet tea and said, "If you hadn't stood your ground, kid, we'd still be paying Randall's vacation fund." My face burned, but it felt good. Still, justice moved slowly. Randall's legal team filed motion after motion. Trial stretched on, but the evidence was mountainous and the prosecution meticulous. In a plea deal, Doreen flipped first, providing emails proving Randall coached board members on pressure tactics to secure houses for his acquaintances. Bryce folded next when prosecutors threatened additional charges for past pranks. He testified that Randall promised him free rent for a year if he could make newcomers uncomfortable enough to leave. When the verdict finally came, it was headline-worthy. Randall got 9 years in state prison, plus restitution to every homeowner he'd harassed. Doreen received 3 years, suspended after 18 months if she completed community service hours painting houses of low-income families. Quite the poetic twist. Bryce, still technically a college student, received 2 years probation, mandatory anger management, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. The judge tacked on 500 hours of street cleanup so he could reflect on broken windows, perhaps. The HOA, as a legal entity, dissolved. Our subdivision voted 92% in favor of a new civic association. Voluntary, advisory only, no fines, no power to dictate mailbox shades or grass height. I was elected chair purely because no one else wanted the gig, and everyone agreed I had earned a measure of trust. My first act was to adopt a single-sentence charter: be kind to your neighbors. Meeting adjourned. Months later, on a balmy Saturday, I lounged on my reclaimed deck beneath those oaks Randall once earmarked for removal. A breeze rustled through leaves, scattering light over fresh barbecue paint on the railing. As burgers sizzled, kids laughed over slip-and-slides across 3 adjoining yards. No fences, just shared joy. Mal arrived with iced tea and a mischievous grin. She handed me an envelope containing a check, my share of the civil settlement. I whistled. Enough to cover every repair, every legal bill, and then some. "So," she said, clinking her glass against mine, "still glad you didn't take Randall's hush money?" I watched Bryce mowing his aunt's lawn across the street, supervised by a county officer ticking off his community service hours. He looked up, offered a sheepish wave. I nodded back. Not smug, just resolute. "Yeah," I told Mal, "I think I made the right choice." A dog barked, sprinklers hissed on, and an ice cream truck jangled down the block. Simple suburban soundtrack. For the first time since that chaotic moving day, everything felt normal. But life, like any good story, rarely ends on a single note. The universe tossed me one more plot twist when I found a yellowed envelope tucked behind an attic beam. Inside lay decade-old HOA meeting minutes, scribbled by a long-retired board member who disagreed with Randall back in the day. The minutes detailed questionable land use votes that seemed to involve bribes from a local developer. The statute of limitations hadn't entirely run out on certain environmental violations. I smiled, imagining the look on Randall's face when investigators served fresh subpoenas at the prison gate. Turns out, sometimes revenge isn't just about reclaiming what's yours. Sometimes it's about fixing a system so no one else gets steamrolled. And sometimes it's about throwing the biggest, friendliest block party the cul-de-sac has ever seen. Because freedom tastes better with barbecue sauce and neighborly laughter. I glanced around my yard, inhaled charcoal and cut grass, and felt a satisfaction deeper than any check could buy. Because this wasn't just a victory for me, it was a blueprint. Stand fast, know your rights, gather evidence, and don't let bullies rewrite reality. And if they dial 911 to weaponize the law, well, sometimes that one stupid phone call is the thread that unravels their entire tapestry of lies. My timer dinged, burgers were done. I flipped the last patty onto a bun, shouted for everyone to grab plates, and raised a toast to stubborn homeowners everywhere who refused to back down. "Here's to community," I said, "the kind that actually means something." Everyone cheered. The sun dipped, fireflies sparked, and for once, the only paperwork floating around was a stack of paper plates headed for recycling. I thought the taste of triumph would linger forever. But once the courtroom dust settled and the neighborhood settled into its new, easy rhythm, life kept tossing me curveballs, each one stranger than the last. First came the unmarked envelope. It showed up wedged behind my screen door one fog-damp morning, addressed simply to "Concerned Citizen." Inside lay a photocopy of what looked like a civil engineering schematic: drainage lines, batch numbers for fill dirt, and a hand-drawn arrow pointing to the hollow behind our subdivision where kids had been building BMX ramps for years. Under the arrow, someone had scribbled, "Ask why the creek still smells funny." I could have tossed it as crank mail, but the creek had smelled off all spring, a weird, plasticky odor. So I followed the paper trail. Mal and I drove to the county archives, dust masks in place, and pored over ledger books older than either of us. Hidden in a footnote was a zoning variance granted to a shell company called Clearstream Holdings, the same year Randall became HOA president. Clearstream had dumped clean fill on 3 acres now occupied by a Little League diamond and our community gardens. Clean fill my foot. An attached assay showed off the chart's benzene. We looped in the State Department of Environmental Quality. Their inspectors showed up in white coveralls, plunged test cores into the soil, and whistled. Benzene wasn't the worst of it. Lead, toluene, and something the chemists dubbed a forever chemical all lurked beneath the swing set. The agency barricaded the site overnight and roped in the U.S. attorney because interstate waste shipments were involved. We soon learned Clearstream was a front for Pilatus Construction, the same developer that had bankrolled Randall's pet projects, the jungle gym upgrade, the flashy flower beds at the entrance, even the digital marquee that used to beam HOA warnings at midnight. Pilatus had saved a fortune by burying hazardous soil under a future subdivision instead of paying to dispose of it properly. Suddenly, Randall's 9-year sentence looked like the opening act. While investigators subpoenaed Pilatus executives, Bryce tried to reinvent himself. Probation required him to log 20 hours a week of supervised labor, but he went way beyond, painting fences, hauling mulch, realigning the soccer goals the old board had once padlocked. At first, neighbors crossed the street to avoid him, yet after a month of sweat and sheepish smiles, he earned cautious nods. One Saturday, he asked if I could teach him to change the spark plugs on my old Cherokee. Grease smeared across his forearm, he admitted Randall had always dangled rewards: new gear, gas money, once even a fake scholarship, if Bryce would lean on whichever homeowner was in the crosshairs that week. "I was dumb and broke and wanted to impress the guy who seemed powerful," he muttered. Guess that blew up. I handed him the ratchet and told him redemption isn't a switch. It's a circuit you rebuild one clean connection at a time. By June, the Civic Association hatched its first communal project, a raised bed garden behind the elementary school. We collected railroad ties and compost, kids painted plant markers shaped like carrots and radishes, and retirees volunteered to water during heat waves. On dedication day, the mayor, even he couldn't ignore our saga now, cut a ribbon while local news cameras rolled. The segment aired that evening, and I'd swear every anchor pronounced our street name correctly for the first time in history. A week later, we arrived to find every tomato seedling uprooted and jammed upside down. At first, we blamed raccoons until a neighbor's trail cam caught a shadowy figure in a high-vis vest. Yanking seedlings at 2 a.m., the vest bore Pilatus Construction's logo. I installed 2 solar-powered cameras and posted the live feed to the association's forum. The very next night, the saboteur returned, unaware he was starring in a real-time sting. He dug with furious speed, tossing pepper plants like confetti. 20 homeowners sprinted from their porches as if on cue, flashlights blazing. The vandal froze, mouth half open. He was Pilatus's junior site supervisor, Jacob Malloy. In his truck bed, we found a duffel of herbicide, spray paint cans, and forged work orders authorizing soil aeration. Police charged him with criminal mischief and evidence tampering. Pilatus's lawyers tried claiming he'd acted alone, but phone records revealed a 14-minute call with the CEO the hour before the garden got trashed. The U.S. attorney added that to Pilatus's rap sheet, and by autumn, 3 senior executives were in bracelets, awaiting trial on environmental crimes. The EPA slapped an emergency remediation order on the toxic acreage. Pilatus's insurance refused to cover intentional wrongdoing, so the company hemorrhaged cash. Investors fled like rats from a burning pier. The state legislature took notes. A reform bill, drafted in part by Mal and me over takeout tie, fizzed through committee. Stricter oversight of HOAs, mandatory board member background checks, and criminal liability if they colluded in zoning shenanigans. During the public comment session, I testified, palms sweating. Yet my voice held steady as I explained how a simple house purchase spiraled into a racketeering case because oversight was a mile wide and an inch deep. Reporters quoted my closing line, "Bad actors fill vacuums, shine a flashlight, and they scatter." Randall heard that quote on the evening news inside State Penitentiary. According to a guard who happened to know my cousin, Randall threw a foam cup at the TV and earned a week in segregation. Actions have consequences, even behind bars. Meanwhile, with no HOA breathing down our necks, creativity blossomed. One neighbor converted her bland garage into a tiny art studio and invited kids for free Saturday watercolor lessons. Another, a retired Air Force mechanic, hosted evening bike maintenance clinics. We painted a community mural on the once forbidden perimeter wall. Silhouettes of people passing garden tools along a sunrise gradient. Tourists detoured off the highway just to snap selfies. Yet healing revealed old fault lines. A faction of longtime residents feared we were drifting into lawlessness. What if someone painted their house neon teal? Two elderly brothers griped about lawn lengths, convinced property values would plummet. I proposed a compromise, voluntary guidelines plus a peer mediation committee. No fines, just conversations. The measure passed, though not unanimously. Dissent keeps us honest. During mediation training, I learned the fine art of listening without waiting to reply. It came in handy when the brothers, arms folded, accused me of letting the circus run the zoo. I asked them to imagine the worst-case scenario. They feared rusted cars on cinder blocks. I pointed out our municipal codes already banned that. Eventually, they conceded their real fear wasn't teal paint, but losing the predictability the old HOA once promised. We agreed the association would host quarterly town halls, publish minutes, and rotate meeting venues, so no one felt shut out. They still don't love my mailbox color, but they now wave when I roll by. Because the universe loves bookends, the final twist began exactly 1 year after my obstructed move-in day. The county clerk phoned to say Randall had petitioned for early release to attend a family medical emergency. His mother had suffered a stroke. Compassionate leave hearings are rare but real. The possibility knotted my stomach. If Randall returned, even briefly, could he stir his old network? Mal and I drafted impact statements for the parole board, detailing ongoing investigations and witness intimidation concerns. Half the neighborhood signed a joint letter. At the hearing, Randall's attorney argued he posed no threat. After all, the HOA no longer existed. But prosecutors introduced fresh evidence from the environmental case. Handwritten notes suggesting Randall kept a slush fund abroad. Cross-examination exposed the emergency as exaggerated. His mother was in rehab, recovering steadily. The board denied release. Randall would serve his full term, plus whatever the EPA crimes added. Driving home from the courthouse, I passed the toxic lot. Thick plastic tarps blanketed the soil, wind lifting the edges like a giant black flag. Excavators waited to scoop the poison and truck it to a certified site, this time with escorts and bar-coded manifests. A bulky new sign warned, "Area under federal remediation, no trespassing." I parked at the curb, stared through chain link, and felt the same mix of rage and satisfaction that had driven me since day one. Cleaning up someone else's mess wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. That evening, we held our second annual Freedom from Fines cookout. Long tables stretched along the cul-de-sac, fairy lights zigzagged overhead, and the air smelled of smoked brisket. Bryce manned the grill, sweating behind a mountain of meat, determined to serve every neighbor personally. Even the lawn-length brothers sat under the glow, plates piled high, debating baseball instead of hedge heights. At dusk, we projected a slideshow on the garage door. Snapshots of the past year, the garden rebuild, courtroom verdicts, Doreen repainting a veteran shelter in her court-ordered khakis. Laughter rippled when Mal snuck in a freeze frame of Randall's shocked face from the local news, mouth agape like a startled gopher. Later, I wandered to my deck, the same deck where burgers had sparked our first tentative celebration. Fireflies resumed their nightly waltz. I heard footsteps and found Bryce behind me, 2 lemonades in hand. He set one down and gazed at the star-dusted sky. "Funny," he said, A year ago, I thought this street owed me something. Now I'm just happy nobody locks their doors when I walk up. Redemption's a journey, I replied. We're all lugging something, but maybe we can lighten each other's bags. He held up his glass. To lighter bags. We clinked. The night hummed with crickets and distant laughter. Somewhere out front, a sparkler hissed, and a child squealed delight. No sirens, no phone calls, no neon violation stickers. Just life. Messy and honest. I thought that would be the quiet epilogue, but 2 days later, an investigator from the EPA called. They'd recovered digital records implicating a regional freight company in shipping the toxic fill. Records previously scrubbed from Pilatus's servers. Would I testify again? I sighed, traced the grain on my teak railing and said, "Schedule it. Let's finish the job." Because when a storm rips through your town, you don't rebuild halfway and call it done. You plant deeper roots, stack sandbags higher, and teach your neighbors how to read the radar. And if another Randall shows up, you greet him with paperwork, cameras, and a community that refuses to be intimidated. Sometimes the price of peace is eternal vigilance. But under a canopy of clean soil, honest bylaws, and block party laughter, that price feels downright reasonable. The subpoena arrived on a Thursday morning, registered mail, crisp government emblem in the corner. I signed, knowing full well what it meant. Another day in federal court, another round of testimony, another chance to peel back the onion Pilatus Construction had tried so hard to lacquer in corporate gloss. The new defendant was GreenLeaf Freight, a regional carrier with blue and orange rigs you see barreling down interstates coast to coast. According to EPA forensics, GreenLeaf hauled 42 unmanifested loads of contaminated fill into our subdivision under cover of night, then doctored the logs to show benign aggregate bound for a recycling plant. The scheme saved both companies millions in disposal fees. It poisoned our groundwater instead. I spent the weekend prepping with Mal, reviewing timelines, learning acronyms I hoped never to encounter again. RCRA, CERCLA, DOT 49 CFR. She quizzed me until I could rattle off shipment dates like sports stats. Remember, she coached, jurors trust people who speak plain English. Tell them how the creek smelled, how your tomato leaves curled at the edges. Let the lawyers translate it into statutes. Court convened in a downtown tower smelling of lemon polish and nerves. GreenLeaf Freight's lawyer, suit sharp enough to tweet, blamed rogue dispatchers for illegal dumping. But server room freight logs showed midnight detours blessed by executives, drivers bribed with bonuses, emails bragging that the HOA prez will roll out a green carpet. Each new exhibit pulled the jury closer. On the stand, I traced the chain from Randall's fake HOA citation to EPA crews staking no trespassing signs in toxic mud. A lie dialed to 911 almost got me shot, I said. But the lie hit a profit scheme. We only sniffed it out because neighbors kept asking why the creek stank. Heads nodded. Everyone knows a sick pet, a weird sewage burp, a buried corporate letter. Defense tried painting me an anti-developer activist. Didn't you help write legislation that slows housing projects? I smiled. If transparency and soil tests are slow, I'll wear that badge. Even the bailiff smirked. After 9 days, the jury needed 5 hours. GreenLeaf was convicted of hazardous waste transport, conspiracy, and falsified logs. The judge, a former Marine, levied crushing fines, placed the company under monitored probation, jailed 2 executives, and ordered a 20-year medical fund for anyone living within 3 miles. When the gavel fell, Mal squeezed my shoulder. The last brick of accountability clicked into place. Cleanup crews hauled away the final barrels under white hazmat tents that looked like lunar domes. Fresh topsoil arrived. Kids planted sunflower rows, and we posted wooden plaques. Regrowth sponsored by Justice. Every yellow face reminded us why we fought. Bryce finished probation early, perfect attendance, glowing reviews. Now a horticulture student, he delivered heirloom pepper seedlings for next year's cookout. I handed him a corner of yard and said, "Your garden, go." He turned the soil that once grew only trouble. The infamous Lawn-Length brothers reinvented themselves, launching a free tool-sharing shed with pegboards and a homemade barcode scanner. Given purpose instead of power, they became beloved quartermasters. I stayed civic association chair longer than planned. Under cafe lights and mason jar lemonade, we tackled street lighting, teen driver safety, and a left turn lane. We adopted a 7th grader's motto: "Here, we do hard things together." Shared struggle forged real community. 18 months after the verdict, I cut the ribbon at a new environmental enforcement office. I told the crowd, had I taken Randall's hush money, I'd own a bigger house somewhere else and never smell that creak. Comfort is tempting, but justice compounds. Applause rattled the rafters. Now weekends are bike rides, slow barbecue, and porch swing sunsets. My Cherokee still sits 6'2" in the drive, no neon citations in sight. Kids dribble basketballs, mowers hum, and the air smells only of autumn leaves. A house is sticks and shingles. A home is the story you write inside. Ours is inked with stubborn neighbors, crisp evidence, and the promise that if bullies return, they'll meet a street armed with law books and, if needed, a flash mob potluck brigade, ready with casseroles, coffee, and unwavering resolve. Friends, thank you. See you soon.